It was a red-eye flight from Chicago to New York, late November, and the plane was nearly full. I was working as a flight attendant for a major airline, used to the usual mix of tired business travelers and holiday vacationers. But that night, something felt off right from the start. I noticed him shortly after boarding, a man in his mid-40s, dressed in a dark, worn-out coat and a faded baseball cap pulled over his eyes. He didn't speak to anyone and avoided eye contact, quietly settling into a window seat near the back. No luggage beyond a small, battered carry-on. He seemed like the kind of person who wanted to be invisible as the plane took off. I went through the usual beverage service, keeping an eye on passengers. He didn't ask for anything. In fact, he barely moved, sitting stiffly, staring out the window into the night. Hours passed. The cabin lights dimmed. Passengers tried to sleep or distract themselves with movies and books, but the man remained, rigid in his seat, eyes fixed ahead like he was waiting for something. Around 2 hours in, a strange tension filled the air. Several passengers whispered about feeling watched. I tried to reassure them quietly, but honestly, I felt the same way. Suddenly, I heard a faint knocking noise coming from the seat area. I approached carefully. "Sir, is everything all right?" I asked softly. He didn't respond, just turned his head slowly to face me, revealing pale, sunken eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. Then, without warning, he whispered, "Don't look behind you." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced subtly toward the rear of the cabin. No one was there, but I felt a presence, a weight pressing on my shoulders. Like icy fingers gripping my skin. Trying to shake it off, I returned to my duties. Over the next hour, the knocking continued intermittently, and passengers became more restless. Some said they heard whispers. Others reported cold drafts in their rows. No one saw the man moving. Yet, he was everywhere in their peripheral vision. A shadow. That vanished when looked at directly. Near the end of the flight. The man suddenly stood up and walked toward the front, passing me without a word. The cabin lights flickered briefly as he moved. When he reached the cockpit door, it was closed. He knocked 3 times. The pilots didn't respond. He turned back slowly, staring at the entire cabin, and then vanished, literally disappeared. From sight as if he had never been there, panicked, I alerted the captain. They searched the plane thoroughly after landing. No one could explain the man's identity. No records of a passenger by his description. Passengers who had been on the flight remembered the eerie silence. The chilling knocks, the feeling of dread. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted, but every time I fly a red eye, I remember the silent passenger and wonder if he's still out there, waiting to board another plane. A few years ago, I started working as a flight attendant with a small airline based out of San Diego, California. It was my first real job, and I was excited. The airline mostly handled short flights along the West Coast, cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. It seemed perfect for someone like me, fresh out of training and eager to see new places. Everything started normally enough. My shifts were mostly morning flights, which meant early wake-ups, but also early evenings. I lived alone in a cozy apartment near Mission Valley. My routine quickly fell into place. Early mornings, busy afternoons, then quiet evenings at home. Unwinding before an early bedtime. About a month into my job, things took an odd turn. It began subtly. I noticed a passenger, a man in his late 30s named Jonathan, as I later learned, appearing on several of my flights. He was quiet, always polite, and nothing about him initially raised alarms. Frequent flyers were common. It wasn't unusual to see familiar faces on routes like these. So, at first, I didn't think much about it. But after seeing him for the 4th time in 2 weeks, always on my specific flights, I began to feel uneasy. Each time, he'd smile politely, say hello, but then watch me quietly from his seat. There wasn't anything inherently threatening about him, but something about his quiet gaze felt intense, almost overly familiar. I tried to shake it off as paranoia. After all, as a flight attendant, dealing with passengers was part of my job. But soon, his presence seemed less coincidental. On a flight from San Diego to Seattle, I glanced toward his seat halfway through the flight and saw him taking a photo pointed directly at me. When our eyes met, he calmly lowered his phone, smiled, and looked away. The next day, on a different flight, I deliberately avoided looking his way. But during beverage service, I caught him glancing over repeatedly. Each time he noticed me looking back, he would quickly avert his gaze. It felt calculated, as though he were testing how much he could get away with. My discomfort grew. I hadn't told anyone about this man yet, not my colleagues, friends, or family. Part of me was embarrassed. Maybe I was just overreacting. It wasn't uncommon for crew members to attract occasional unwanted attention, but there was something unsettlingly deliberate about Jonathan's behavior. A turning point came. A week later, during an overnight layover in Portland, it had been a tiring day with multiple flights, and I was looking forward to a peaceful night at the hotel. After checking into the Marriott downtown, I decided to walk to a nearby cafe for dinner. As I stepped onto the street, I glanced casually across the road and froze. Jonathan was standing under a street lamp, seemingly waiting for someone. My heart immediately began to pound. Maybe it was just a coincidence. He was probably a business traveler after all. But then I recalled he'd been on my earlier flight. Was he following me? Trying to remain calm, I crossed the street in the opposite direction and walked quickly toward the cafe, hoping he hadn't noticed me. Inside, I chose a table far from the windows and kept nervously checking outside. Halfway through my meal, the door opened and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Jonathan entered. He didn't approach me. Instead, he ordered a coffee, sat at the counter, and casually glanced my way, acknowledging me with a slight nod. My appetite vanished. I quickly paid, left the cafe, and hurried back to the hotel, constantly checking behind me. Thankfully, I didn't see him again that night, but sleep came difficultly. By now, his behavior had crossed the line. I debated reporting him to the airline, but still felt unsure. He hadn't explicitly threatened me or done anything illegal that I could prove. Still, fear had begun to shape my days at work. I found myself constantly scanning passengers' faces, dreading his presence. Weeks went by without seeing him, and I began to relax, convincing myself it had all been my imagination running wild. Then, on a late evening flight from Los Angeles to San Diego, I saw his face again. This time he was in the front row, right next to the galley. I felt trapped. Throughout the short flight. Jonathan watched my every move openly. It was as if he wanted me to notice, to understand he wasn't going away. After landing, I waited until everyone else had exited, trying to avoid confronting him. But he lingered deliberately, taking his time gathering his things. Finally, as he passed me, he leaned slightly closer and said, "Have a good night. I'll see you soon." My blood went cold. His words seemed harmless, but the tone and the intent behind them felt menacing. Once he left, I stood frozen, heart racing. I realized then I couldn't ignore this anymore. I needed to report him. The next day, I spoke with my supervisor, finally sharing everything. Airline security and local police became involved, but they told me there was little they could do without clear evidence or explicit threats. Jonathan hadn't committed a clear crime yet. The airline changed my schedule and took me off flights temporarily, hoping distance would discourage him. It seemed to help, at least at first. Weeks passed quietly. But one night as I entered my apartment building after grocery shopping, I noticed a folded note slipped under my door. Shaking, I opened it. Inside was a single neatly printed sentence. "You shouldn't have told anyone." My hands trembled as I stared at the words, realizing with terrifying clarity what this meant. He knew exactly where I lived. I immediately called the police, showing them the note. They investigated, reviewed security footage, but found no clear images of anyone suspicious. Again, I was left with nothing but fear. Eventually, I had no choice but to move apartments, change my contact information, and even request transfers within the airline. Slowly, I tried rebuilding a sense of normalcy, though the memory haunted me. Today, I still look over my shoulder whenever I'm alone, always vigilant, always cautious that the man called Jonathan never showed himself again. But I never shake the feeling he's out there somewhere, patiently waiting. In the late hours of December 29th, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a Lockheed L-101 TriStar, was scheduled to fly from New York to Miami. On board were 176 passengers and crew. Among them, a highly experienced flight crew led by Captain Bob Loft. What should have been a routine flight quickly turned into a nightmare. One that has become one of the most chilling and disturbing aviation mysteries ever recorded. As Flight 401 descended toward Miami International Airport, the crew noticed the landing gear indicator light failed to confirm the nose gear was down. The pilots began troubleshooting this minor issue, completely focused on the indicator panel. As a result, the autopilot was disengaged inadvertently, and the plane started losing altitude. Nobody realized the plane was slowly descending until it was too late. Seconds later, Flight 401 crashed into the Florida Everglades, killing 101 people instantly, including Captain Loft and First Officer Don Repo. The crash was a horrific tragedy, but what followed was far more unsettling. In the weeks and months after the accident, Eastern Airlines employees and maintenance crews reported strange phenomena aboard other Lockheed L-1011s, especially those involved in recovery efforts. Mechanics heard eerie footsteps and voices echoing through empty cabins. Pilots reported flickering cockpit lights and mysterious control inputs that no one could explain. Most chillingly, several flight crews claimed to see ghostly apparitions of the Flight 401 crew, especially Captain Loft, aboard their plane sometimes, appearing in the cockpit or walking down the aisles. One flight attendant even reported feeling a cold hand grip her arm tightly while serving coffee. The hand vanished when she turned around. But the chill lingered. These encounters sparked intense fear and anxiety among Eastern Airlines personnel, with some crews refusing to fly Lockheed L-1011s, convinced they were haunted by the souls. The dead crew. Despite investigations, no scientific explanation was found for the strange activity. Theories range from supernatural hauntings to collective trauma-induced hallucinations. Some say the spirits of those lost in Flight 401 could not find peace, trapped by the sudden, violent end of their journey. Others believe the aircraft itself became a conduit for residual energy, a grim reminder of the disaster. To this day, Flight 401 remains one of the most disturbing true stories in aviation. A tale of tragedy and haunting that lingers like a shadow over every Lockheed L-1011 that takes to the skies